be giving you the information that you came for. Paul Raymer has more than 45 years of experience in the energy conservation field. He is a retired HERS rater. HERS stands for Home Energy Rating System. He's a former member of the Falmouth Energy Committee and has taught building science courses across the country. He is the author of the Residential Ventilation Handbook, as well as the author of 3 novels. But tonight he will stick to nonfiction. Please help me welcome Paul Raymer.
Thanks, Lily. Appreciate it. I'd rather talk about novels, frankly. You know, but I love building science. I have been doing it for a long time. I live in a wonderful old house in Falmouth, in the historic district. That when I moved in, it had no insulation, no storm windows, and that was, you know, when oil cost 25 cents a gallon, and it was so. I came here actually to work in underwater acoustics and electronics. I have a degree in creative writing, so all of these things I've sort of fallen into over the years. But I think that one of the things that happened to me was in working with this old house, I just love houses. I mean, they just talk to me. And it was an absolute thrill to start to learn what's going on. You know, why is that wall leaking? You know, why do I have this drip in this old steam heat system? Do you really have to keep all the radiators connected? What happens if you take out a radiator in a room? I mean, learning all of those basics of building science really gave me a feel for how all that works. And over the years, it's been absolutely fantastic since I started in this. I mean, there weren't blower doors. Are you all familiar with blower doors? Okay, we'll get there too. But the diagnostic tools have gotten so good. I used to use this thing called an inclined bolometer to measure the airflows and pressures. And you look at it and think, well, you know, that's about there on the scale. And now we're down to fractions of a Pascal. So it's been an incredible ride. And so you guys, Truro, you've got an absolutely gorgeous town here. Falmouth is very different. You want me to speak up? I will try to do that. Sounds okay to me, you know, but I'm right here. I hate the term expert. I really do. I mean, I figure somebody who's an expert has to know absolutely everything. And I can tell you there's very few things that I know absolutely everything about. I mean, you think about your cell phone. I mean, do you know all the things your cell phone can do? I mean, I have to ask my kids how to use this thing. You know? So the building science stuff I'm great with, and questions about that, but as Lily mentioned, you know, this code stuff for most of us, the guys that have been writing it have been working at it for about 1.5 years, but the rest of us got on board fairly recently. So there's a lot to do, but we'll try. So let's see. Oh, by the way, are there any lawyers besides my wife in the room? I always have to, because she says I get myself into trouble. All right. I used to say if the phone rings, pass it to the person to your left and let them agree to everything. Okay, so these are the things we're going to look at. The base code, stretch code. You're a green community, so you're already a stretch code. There's been a whole bunch of changes in the stretch code since January 1. So we're going to talk about that, the HERS ratings. And then the specialized code, which is essentially the step that I've been told you want to take. And so if you're good with the stretch code, know everything that's going on there, the step into the specialized code is pretty simple. So do you all know everything that's in the base code? Oh, okay. All right. So one of the things, Massachusetts is a real leader in energy efficiency in the country. We have some of the best programs. We're far ahead on an awful lot of stuff. But we've recognized, or the state recognized, that we got to do something about this climate change stuff. And so the state put in this program that basically says we have to get to net zero by 2050. And that means that new houses that are built by new houses, this isn't existing, new houses have to generate as much energy as they use. So net zero, essentially. And that's tough. And so that's what we got to do. We're mandated, that's by law. That's what we're going to do. So the thing about buildings is that they are a major portion. 1% of the total building space each year means 27% of our expected building space in 2050 hasn't been built yet. So we can do it. You know, you can, see if this works. Oh, no reflection there. That percentage, as we build the new buildings, we got to make those buildings energy efficient so that we can save, make that impact on the climate change. And so the new buildings, how many of you are builders? That was a little finger there. Okay. Retired, huh? Well, it's tough to make changes to existing buildings. When you start from scratch, you know, you can do it all, plan it in advance. But when you're working with an existing building, I can tell you on my house, when I make changes, I call it project creep. You know, as soon as we want to move something, you open up the wall and you have no idea what's in there and what's been there. And so making those changes. So if we're going to make this impact, we need to make it on new buildings. And that's a little bit easier to swallow. So Truro is a green community. And so you are committed to reduced emissions. You've actually received $528,000 in the Green Communities programs for doing things in the town. So it's a whole bunch of money that you've gotten already from this program. So that's essentially your timeline. The state put in the Green Communities Act in 2008. You voted to be a green community in 2011. I can't remember what it was in Falmouth. I know it took us forever to get to be a green community. So you guys are ahead. So then in 2023, Mass DOER updated the building code again. And so that's what you're working with now, is the new stretch code. All right, so there are basically three code options now. There's the base code, which is that lovely gray. You have the stretch code, which is light blue, and the specialized code, which is green. I'm giving you the colors because Ian Finlayson, the guy that wrote this, is very proud of the colors, so I thought I'd pass that along. So there are still communities, there are 51 communities that are still in the base code. You know, one of the things I want to tell you is that there's a lot of confusion about what the base code is these days. The BBRS got tangled up in updating from the 9th edition to the 10th edition, and they haven't really resolved that thing yet. And there's this International Energy Code, the IECC, which our energy codes are based on. But the 10th edition of the state code hasn't really come into play yet. We're still in the 9th edition. But a lot of this stuff, the new stretch code stuff, is based on the 2021, which would be in the 10th edition. You confused? Yeah. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people are confused just because of those dates. But just ignore that. Because that's really down in the weeds. So base code, stretch code is where you are. The specialized code is the net zero code that you want to move to. Have I got that? You there? Okay. Please do interrupt me.
I just want to make one thing clear, Paul. The town doesn't want to adopt the specialized code. The town is going to vote on whether or not to adopt it next month at our town meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is known as the specialized opt-in code. You can choose whether you want it or not. And so most of this is about deciding whether you want to go there.
Is there a list of these communities somewhere?
Yes, there is.
Where is that located? I mean,
There's a map on the DOER website.
okay.
Now, I didn't include it in this because one of the things about those maps is if your town was surrounded by people who were still in the base code, builders going from one town to the next would have confusion and problems, but you know, you're pretty much in the middle of green communities.
Do you know who the four are, who are specialized?
They're all around Boston.
Yeah.
I can look it up.
Curious.
You're just eager to get there, is that?
Hey, Paul. There's
Yes, ma'am.
actually 6 right now.
6?
6,
Right.
yep. Lexington was the newest. They came on this week.
Who was?
Lexington.
Lexington.
Yep. And there's Newton, Brookline, I believe, and I don't remember the others. But Watertown and Somerville, thanks, Bob.
There you go.
Thank you.
We have a great audience here. I'll be here all week, thank you. No, I won't. Okay. So let's leave that. We'll come back to the dates on these things when we move along here. So right now, a HERS rating system, a HERS is from the Residential Energy Services Network, ResNet. And ResNet basically developed this rating system for houses. What it does is you go into the software as a HERS rater. You go into the software and you say, I'm going to build this house, and they're going to have triple glazed windows, and I'm going to have R90 insulation in the attic, and all this stuff that you're going to do in this house that you're thinking of building. And the software builds the same house built to the 2006 code. And then it is able, by that calculation, to tell you the difference between what it would be if you built it to the 2006 code and what it is that you want to build, what you're telling it you want to build. Does that make sense? I mean, you can't do it without software. It's in there, and there are only certain pieces of software that are approved by ResNet to make those calculations. And so a house that has a score of 100 is a house that's just purely a 2006 code-built house. It's like the worst house you can build to code. It's a terrible way to think of things, but that's what it is. And so because the HERS ratings, the number of HERS ratings in Massachusetts have been going up dramatically over the years, last year the average HERS rating for a house in Massachusetts was 51, had a 51 score. That means that it's 49% better than a house built in 2006.
You mean new construction?
New construction. Yep. All of this stuff is essentially new construction. I mean, You can do a HERS rating on an existing house, but it's pretty challenging. Okay? All right, so one of the elements of the HERS rating is the blower door testing. So the way the process works, the house, you model a house on the software, you take that to the building department, you say, this is what I'm going to build. And then as you build it, the HERS rater comes out and looks at the insulation and checks the ratings on the doors and the windows and makes sure that the insulation is installed to what's called a grade 1 level, which is almost perfect. I mean, it's really good. Because every time you compress insulation in walls, you lose some of the R value. And you set up little internal convective currents and stuff. So the HERS rater comes out, and builders don't always like the HERS raters because when they come out and they say, you know, that's not grade 1. You know, you got to take that all out and put it back in. They're not happy. And that's really one of the keys to all of this, of getting at these levels, is paying attention to the details. All of this stuff really relies on paying attention to the details. And so then when the house is done, the HERS rater can come out and do the final blower door test. In here, he's checking the ducts to make sure your ducts don't leak, because if the ducts leak, you know, that heat's not being delivered to where it's supposed to go. And on top of that, you can cause other problems in the walls when there's air-conditioned air. There's one house I did, the ducts under the floor between the second and the third floor, the ducts weren't insulated, and the condensation caused the floors above it to actually start to warp from the moisture from the cold air being emitted between the ducts. So again, not that long ago, you know, HVAC contractors, are there HVAC contractors in the room? HVAC contractors didn't really have to pay attention to all of those details. I mean, it's worked this way all along, and so they just did it. But with duct testing, you really have to make sure that they don't leak. So the blower door test, they put that big, have any of you had a blower door test on your house? Okay. I mean, it's essentially a big...
Paul, is this the same test that the Cape Light Compact does when they do a house audit?
They're supposed to.
Yeah.
All of these just apply to new bills, right?
Yep.
Okay.
We'll talk a little bit about the new stretch code. There are some things about additions and alterations, and we'll get there. Yes, sir.
Can you use a infrared camera to find out where the leaking spots are?
Infrareds are great. They're terrific, but they'll only let you see the surface temperature of the wall. There are some not so great energy people who will tell you they can detect water leaks and all sorts of other things, but they're basically just measuring the surface temperature of the wall. So you can see where the insulation was missed when the wall is closed. You can see, I've had HVAC contractors put in duct systems and then sheetrocked right over the opening where there was supposed to be a grill. And I've found it by turning on the heating system and scanning it with my infrared, and there's the hot spot, and you better put the grill in there. So, it's attention to detail. I'm going to emphasize that because that's what that's all about. But the blower door is much more useful, really, than if I had to choose between an infrared camera and a blower door every time. Because you can find all the leaks and cracks and everything else. Sir?
I built a 6-panel building, and what I learned during that process is that it's not the insulation that's most important, it's the tightness of the building, it's the air changes in the house. Which, if you think about that, having this much insulation versus this much insulation isn't as important as making sure that that gap at the sill is sealed properly.
Absolutely.
It makes you think about the whole building differently, I think. For me, it did.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really surprising when you start seeing those things, because the tools and stuff, you can really start to see where you've been doing things. A lot of good builders will have their own blower door and sort of do an in-process blower door test so they can watch it, watch the leaks and stuff as they're doing it. Okay, so then the HERS rater gives you a final number on your HERS rating when you're finished, and life is good. The other process, sir.
What's the number of a good one? Because some of my houses now are too tight. They've got to put in ventilation to bring fresh air in.
Absolutely.
So what's the range in this star blower test?
The code, well, okay. Not a HERS rating, but the ACH, air changes per hour. When we test houses with blower doors, we test them at what's called 50 pascals of pressure. And 50 pascals is about the same as a 20-mile-an-hour wind blowing on all sides of the house at the same time. Totally unreal. And so you know when you get the house up to 50 that what you're looking at are just the leaks in the house. And so you want now, the code is looking at 3 air changes per hour at 50 pascals. And that is a good tight house. I mean, it used to be 5 not that long ago. But understanding what you're looking at with that, we'll talk about ventilation too. As you can tell, since I wrote a book about it, I have some opinions there. But we'll go there. And look here, when you go with the passive house approach, which is some of the things that are in the specialized code, they're looking at 0.6 ACH 50. I mean, you have to have a special ring on your blower door. The ring on the blower door is going to be around that size, as opposed to what's usually there. I mean, like, look at the opening. Am I going too slowly? I feel like the problem is I go down these rabbit holes and you don't let me go there. Let's see, go back for a second. You see the size of that opening? That's a big opening on that blower door. And my house needs that size opening to test it. But when you're getting down to 0.6, you're getting an opening, that's really tiny. And that's why you need the ventilation. All right. So if you take the passive house or FIAS, passive house is another approach to then HERS, to doing the system in the house. There are some very specific rules that you need to follow to get your passive house rating. Is that what you're doing? Are you doing the passive? Yeah. Is it passive house? No.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, more by accident than design. The tightness that we're managing to get is getting down to 0.45 as an average, although the actual warranty was to get it down to 1, but in practice they're getting down to 0.45.
That's tough.
And then thereafter, of course, you've got controlled ventilation.
Exactly.
And the beauty of that is that you can now bring in just the right amount of air, and you can also push it through filters and take out all that pollen, and you can start to do things in terms of taking the heat out of the exhaust air that comes out of the house and put it into the new air coming in. And now you can really start to reduce the cost of warming that house. And you're already using substantially less because you've got less of a leaky house. It's as simple as that. And if you've got a 5 or 6 ACH, you're losing so much air, Might as well have the door open all the time. It's really expensive.
Yeah, I sometimes tell people when I test their houses, I have this 12-inch pizza. You have a hole this size that's open all the time on your house. Is that, visualizations like that are better than air changes per hour. Yeah. Anyway. All right, so for the 10th edition of the code that I was just talking about a little while ago, the BBRS approved as of January 1, it more or less moved from the BBRS to the DOER, state agencies. And so they're trying to finalize that. They hope that all of that decision-making will happen sometime in the summer, and then there will be a concurrency period between, so that the 10th and the 9th editions will be going at the same time. You can go either way, but then it will become, hopefully, it will become code as of January 1, 2024. All right. So on the stretch code update, the stretch, this is what you're in now, January 1, 2023. It's no longer just the HERS rating of 55, which is what it was in December. You can have to, if your house is a mixed fuel house, you can, HERS ratings are like golf scores, okay? And basically, the lower it is, the better it is, right? And so a HERS score of 52 is a better house than a HERS score of 55. So an all-electric house by the new code can have a HERS score of 55. If you have an all-electric with some solar on it, it can be a HERS score of 58. There's a little more leniency because you met those. One of the nice things about HERS ratings is that there are trade-offs. You can trade off little things here for other things there.
How low do HERS scores get? Are you seeing houses that hit 1 or 0, or is that an impossibility at this point?
I've seen HERS scores now below 0.
Which is that house is generating energy for the rest of the community, right?
So actually on the specialized code, you're actually shooting for HERS 0. So the commercial stuff comes in on July 1st, the commercial HERS ratings and commercial and multifamily. And then on July 1st, 2024, the residential and HERS scores drop again so that you're, it's 42, 45. And you have the option of doing the TEDI evaluation, which we won't talk. Do you notice the color schemes? That was the blue. This is the green. This is specialized. So in the specialized, the town, like you, votes to adopt it. Then the DOER wants to give yourselves 6 months to put it into place. And so if you adopted it at your next meeting, you have a 6-month phase-in start at July 1, and then that would be in place by January 1, 2024.
What are the costs per square foot? What are the differences to build to these levels?
You want me to, or
You want to do that?
Yeah, I want to do this. So, because this comes up in all of this kind of stuff, and we can't tell you what the cost per square foot is. Because as you've seen, there's a lot of options. It depends on the size of your building or your addition, what kind of heating system you choose. So just like if you walked up to somebody today and said, I want to remodel my kitchen, how much is that going to cost?
But you can get
No.
per square foot.
No, because not yet. That hasn't happened yet. The DOER, I believe, is doing studies to try to come up with some estimates, but this stuff is 3 months old, 4 months old. So it's way too early to make those assessments, unless, Bob, you have something to say? Nothing wrong with that? You do have choices. I mean, there's a multi-path to get to this. But, John, go ahead.
The only point I wanted to make was, traditionally, the answer to that question is, it may cost you a little bit more to build a net zero house, but the payback that you'll get in terms of reduced bills will quickly put that money back into your pocket. That's the first thing. The second thing is, as to it costing that much more, it really does depend, of course, as
Yeah.
Carol pointed out, on exactly what route you go. But practically, the options that are now increasing as a result of the extensive interest in getting down to net zero are starting to mean that that premium is diminishing in size. And so that premium is starting to become difficult to measure. In fact, I could indicate with a case study, I think, in my own, that we're actually probably going to be able to get in under the cost of doing it in the traditional stick-built method of building a house. Because the particular route I'm going is working with panels that are produced in a factory, in a controlled environment, where they can be produced with a level of precision and productivity that makes them significantly more cost-effective, simply
So
to
you
produce.
mean modular versus?
Modular,
Yes.
and I'm talking about the shell. I'm not looking at the external appearance of the house, but the shell that forms the actual, the thing you're testing when you put that blower door in. And so it's possible to get to a shell at a very cost-efficient price. So I think the simple answer is it's already a great payback in a short period of time, and I suspect it's going to be much better than that inside of a few years. Less than that. And actually I'm coming back into the town to live while I'm building my house in Wellfleet. So I'll be back at the town meeting to try and promote the uptake of this, because this is really a great solution. It's a win-win for everybody.
There's only two ways we can address the emission and reduction of greenhouse gases in Truro, and that's through buildings and transportation. Those are the only ways we can hit it in this town, because we don't have industry, we don't have large manufacturing or anything that's emitting a lot. So it really gets down to houses. We don't even have that many commercial buildings, but also all buildings and transportation. The transportation is coming slowly through the state and the feds. Addressing greenhouse gases through buildings is coming through the state. So that's kind of the premise of all of this, is how do we get better at reducing greenhouse gases? And we're kind of focusing on homes here, but it's also businesses, as we make tighter structures and we have better heating systems that don't emit or don't depend on fossil fuels. But through all of this, you can do combinations of things, as Paul said, that have trade-offs. So that's kind of the point of all this. When you talk about costs, it doesn't cost Truro anything. Okay, the town doesn't pay extra for this. This is just a new set of build, not just, I don't mean to minimize it. But it's moving to the next level, all of us, as a community, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions now and for the future, because you think, what's the lifespan of a house? We have people here living in houses that are from the 1700s.
The state has kind of realigned through Mass Save, they've realigned the incentive programs, and they've realigned so that a homeowner or a builder, it's tied to the homeowner, will actually get, what is it, $15,000 or $20,000? There's various, you will get.
It's 15.
A lot of, yeah, there you go. You'll get a lot of that money back. Plus, there's the IRA now, which for your energy efficient, oh, there you go. Well, sorry. I'm done. I'm done.
Just to add to this conversation real quickly, there are studies that DOER has done on particular building types, comparing all electric to gas use, and they have shown in those examples that it is less expensive when you incorporate in the additional costs for building to all electric, and the incentives that you get, and the change in your mortgage payment, and the change in your energy use, that it is more cost effective to build to all electric than it is to build with mixed fuel and gas.
Fair enough. And I've got a lot of the slides about those energy. And when I showed them to a town, to Leiden, and they said, oh, all these numbers were written for Worcester. And they're not us. It's not what kind of energy we have. Our prices are different. You know, I can't even have our kids move to this town because of the, and I think one of the, W.C. Fields has this great expression about something that's difficult. He says it's like trying to tie a hair ribbon on a bolt of lightning. The problem with a lot of these things is all these prices are changing constantly. I mean, materials have been just going all over the map this last couple of years, as well as energy prices. So a lot of the models that they built were built over a year ago, and so the energy costs and things. So that's why Carol mentioned that they're working on developing new ones.
I work for the Cape Light Compact, and I just want to say if you have any questions about the Mass Save incentive programs, we administer them for Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard, and you can call us anytime with questions, new construction or otherwise. But
There you go.
Thank you.
You know,
Thank you.
that's a really good point too, and I think that if you're thinking about building a new house, you need to connect with your HERS rater right away. If you're thinking about using passive house, you need to get a passive house verifier on board right away. So you're there, and that's what their job is to know this stuff and to be able to advise you on making those choices.
Yeah, I just had one other point. Somebody brought up instability with the electric grid, and we do now have the battery up and running in P-Town. And when the power goes out, that'll automatically kick in and supply power all the way up to ECM. And it depends on whether we're in peak or not in peak, but it can last from 3 to 10 hours providing electricity for our town until the utility can come back and make.
Just last year, there was a power outage in E-Town, and it happened right over here in Truro. There was and everybody out this side lost their electricity. We had a propane generator, we had heat, and I think it was a couple of days before everyone was back on grid. So you're saying, oh yeah, P-Town will cover us, they can't even cover themselves right now.
If you have a greenhouse or a passive, and you put in a propane, a fossil fuel generator, that's okay. That there are some allowances that happen to enable you to have a backup generator that may not be the greenest available.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you can't have an electric unless you have panels and batteries and blah, blah, blah. That isn't this route. So there's no bad about having a backup generator.
Okay, so these are the things already in the stretch code. You're already there. You should be doing this stuff already. So the primary change is the reduction from 55 to 52, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's what's happened now. There should be EV-ready wiring for one parking place for an electric vehicle. And it removes the EPA Energy Star 3.1 option for doing your energy analysis. Just in case you weren't familiar with EV Ready, there are basically 3 levels. You have EV capable, which basically means you have a breaker and a power line available. EV ready means that there's a power line out to a parking place. It's within 10 feet of a parking place. And EV installed means you actually have a charging station where you can park your car. It's, basically part of the wiring, and certainly one of the costs of doing these things is putting in the wiring. But down the road, you may want that wiring already in the house. So it's a new house. You have all the wiring ready, you're ready to rock. The other thing, when you were mentioning ventilation, I could do this for a long time. I've done full weeks of this. But in the ventilation, you basically need air breathing, right? We all do. And so when we had these really leaky houses, like my house, the wind blew through the cracks in the halls. I mean, it was just a whole different world. But now as we get these houses tighter and tighter, we get control, like you mentioned. And so we can control where the air is coming in. We can, with an energy recovery or a heat recovery ventilator, so if the air from the outside is coming in, it goes through this heat exchanger and blows the fresh air into the house. The air from the house comes in the other side and goes through the core. And basically it's the second law of thermodynamics, hot goes to cold, wet goes to dry. So the heat in the warmer airstream transfers that heat to the colder airstream. So the air coming in is pre-warmed by some of the air going out. And in the summertime with air conditioning, if you're using an energy recovery ventilator, it actually transfers some of the moisture as well. So if you have a hot humid day, it basically does a little dehumidification. All right, so these are some of the definitions. When you see those things in the code, you need to know what they mean. There's a whole section, I think it's 202, that puts all those definitions in.
I think being able to understand the difference between the stretch code that's already adopted and the specialized code that we all have to vote on next month. If we could just focus on what are the differences between them, the similarities, the challenges, the benefits of the specialized code. Is that okay with everyone here?
Yes, please.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. This is a terrible slide because it doesn't tell you anything. But basically, the specialized code is built on the stretch code. So if you're already on the stretch code, it just changes the HERS rating numbers a bit for residences. The all-electric goes to 45, mixed fuel goes to 42, and zero energy goes to 0. So the key difference between the stretch and the specialized are essentially the HERS rating numbers.
So you're saying that that what we have to do in building our house is exactly the same in the two codes, we just have to do it a little better?
Exactly. My job here is done. If you got a permit now, it would be in the stretch code that you're already in.
So the January 1 or the July 1?
Now, if you elect to go to the specialized opt-in, and that wouldn't happen because the town wouldn't get it into place until January 1, 2024. Yeah.
What's the line that requires you to go to the specialized codes if you're doing a rehabilitation of an existing building?
Let's zip through this. So, as I say, the primary change is the increase in efficiency, new construction, all electric, HERS 45, HERS 42, and so forth. But those are straight across the board from what you're already doing in the stretch code. So stretch code, July 1, for mixed fuel, HERS 52, mixed fuel is solar, and so on and so forth. Stretch code, July 4, and then specialized code. You see how that's the comparison.
It's also important to notice that the stretch code and the specialized code for a house under 4,000 square feet are the same. So for the specialized code, we're only talking about a house over 4,000 square feet. So we're really going to see the impact on this is on the large community projects. But otherwise, a house under 4,000 square feet would be just the same in the specialized code as the stretch code, and the stretch code's already in place.
Okay, let me just quickly tell you about Passive House. Passive House is a program that was developed in Truro. And so there's Passive House International, PHI, and Passive House US, which is the US version of it. And it's basically just a really energy efficient. It may be passive. We always used to say that passive people lived in active solar houses and active people live in passive solar houses. But I'm not sure how they connected with the word passive.
Well, I think it's important to address this woman's question about renovations and additions.
Yeah.
So if you have an 800 square foot house, little 800 square foot house, and you want to add 500 square feet, then that's more than 50% of the floor area of the house. And so that would require, you'd have to do a HERS rating for the whole building. And that's kind of fair, because you're basically making a new house. You know, you're stripping it down and you're putting.
What is prescriptive path could be followed?
The prescriptive path is basically just put in what the code says you have to put in for insulation, yeah, all tightness, all of those things that you've got to do by code. You don't have to do the whole HERS rating stuff.
So it's 50%.
I thought, but that's true, Paul, I thought it was 100%.
Okay, so 800 square foot house, want to add an 800 square foot addition, that's 100% of the conditioned floor area. So you need a HERS rating of the whole house.
I think the difference there is between addition and alteration.
Okay.
Can you go back a slide? I think that's the difference.
Yeah, I thought that it was 1,000 square feet or more than 100% of the footprint of the house. So then I was.
So the question is, if you have an old house and you're renovating it, at what point do you have to adhere to the new code? Is it if the renovation is 50% of the value? Is it
Not the value.
75% of the square feet?
The conditioned floor area.
The conditioned floor?
Let me just run through a couple of other scenarios here. Average size house, want to convert a 1,200 square foot attic into a bedroom suite. The alteration is greater than 1,000 square feet, and therefore you have to do a HERS rating on the whole house.
On the whole house.
Whole house. If the alteration was 890 square feet,
So it's 50%.
then it's less than 50% of the house, it's less than 1,000 square feet, and therefore you can follow the prescriptive path.
What if the alteration is in a separate building from your main house?
Then it's just a separate building.
It doesn't tie into the square footage of the house?
Right.
Okay.
It's a separate building, like it's an in-law house or something like that. Yeah, it's a separate building. The way the HERS ratings work, the HERS ratings model not only the windows and the doors and the floors and the ceilings, it also models the heating system and the vent, all of that stuff. So it has to be a complete living unit, really, for the HERS rating to work. One more before I.
If it's a separate building, but if it's sort of connected by like a bridge or something.
It's the conditioned floor area, and that's a very major determination. So that if you have like a summer porch or something, that's not, and you don't, it's not conditioned, that's not part of the conditioned floor.
But if you had like an in-law separate building, but it's connected somehow to the first.
If it's a separate building, you'd model it just like because if you have a 4,000 square foot house,
Yeah.
I want to convert my attic into, my 1,200 square foot attic into a bedroom suite, well, it's greater than 1,000 square feet.
Uh-huh.
No.
So I need a HERS rating, a 990 square foot conversion.
Over 4,000, it reverts to 25%.
But this is all quite murky stuff, and I don't think that this stuff is very clear to the people that wrote it. And so it will clarify itself as we go.
You did have that one slide that said something about 1,000 square feet or 100%. That's what I was there.
Catch me up.
Is the project or gut rehab either more than 1,000 square feet or more than 100% of the existing CFA? So that is the information that I had gotten. And I'm just trying to figure out if that's what we need to hold on to, because that doesn't seem to be what we just looked at in other slides, all of which come from the DOER.
I don't think this is right.
I don't think that's right either.
Okay.
Yeah, let's not look at this anymore.
Okay.
Just one thing I think will be helpful, all of a sudden, as someone observed, prescriptive popped up as a concept. And clarifying the difference between what we mean by prescriptive and what we mean by HERS and, whatever. If I'm correct, a HERS rating measures whatever it's measuring for the entire house. You can't do a HERS rating on a part of a house because it's a house-wide thing.
Right.
Prescriptive, tell me if this is wrong, relates to what you need to do, the specific steps you need to take to comply with the permit or whatever it is, as opposed to measuring the result of what you did. Please correct that.
Well, to follow the prescriptive path, you have to follow everything that is in the prescriptive code. right? It tells you,
I'm sorry, is it's not gonna have to be,
you still need to do a blower door test, because that's in the code. You still need to do a duct test, because that's in the code.
what does prescriptive mean then if you're not
Yeah.
measuring HERS?
You're just following what's in the code.
So you're just following it for that part of that you're renovating or that you're adding on? You're not doing it for the entire house, is that correct?
So in other words, you don't have to get it down. That's a good question. So let's say I'm adding an addition on the house, on my old house, you know. I couldn't do a HERS rating on my house. I couldn't get to those numbers. My house is too leaky. I'd never get there. But if I was building a 990 square foot addition we don't need it, but if we were building that kind of an addition on the house, then I could just make sure that it had the right amount of insulation in the ceiling, right amount of insulation in the walls. And the building inspector would check those
I was asking.
So it's just for the new
Just
part?
for the new.
Just for the part of the work that you've done, that's what I mean. So prescriptive, when prescriptive applies, you're measuring the insulation you've done and all those things.
I've done a HERS rating on my house because I'm a crazy person, but my HERS rating was probably, it's less than 100.
86.
Yeah, it was less than 100. I'd say it was probably 80, 85.
85 is the average.
Yeah, because it's an old house.
There's very
Business as usual with new rules. And it's phased in over time, and it is complicated, and we don't have a lot of information about everything. We can't answer all your questions because this became effective in January. And as you can see, it's kind of complex in terms of the details. You know, this isn't just going from one type of cabling to another type of cabling. It's bigger and better. And as I said earlier, the purpose of this is to help you understand what's coming for your own needs, because we are all homeowners. And do we keep just building houses that are leaky and only use fossil fuel, or are we moving along the path? The other thing is I don't think anybody expects anyone who owns a house or a building to immediately jump to all this fabulous new green stuff. We're all going to migrate to it. So you might think, Bob, the person I learned this from, as you think about it, your hot water heater's probably got 3 more years on it. Start doing your research now so that you can consider a better, more efficient hot water heater instead of the same old electric thing you've been plugging in. You know, your furnace is coming to the end of its life. Start your research now so you can look at what's better, what's more efficient. Rather than the thing broke, let me just slam what I have in there all over again. So we're just trying to help you understand that the thinking is evolving. You'll do this piece by piece. That's okay if you're in an existing house, and for folks who are thinking of newer additions, we don't expect that you've got all of this. It's a lot. But if you can work with Cape Light Compact, I would absolutely urge you to partner with them. That's their job, to help you kind of wade through all of this, and they're the ones that can tell you a lot about where you can get money back or save money. So, you know, use your resources. I hope I'm not lecturing too much, but I get really like, this is our chance, you know, to progress. And if we don't do it now, we're going to have to do it tomorrow anyway. You know, this isn't going to stop. This is going to continue to progress because it has to. So lecture done. But if, Paul, you have a few more minutes if people have individual questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I want to thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Paul. Good job.
Yeah, thank you.